For my entire life, the fundamental, unshakable dynamic of our family was built on a very simple, unspoken, and heavily enforced law. My older brother Mark was allowed to make an absolute, catastrophic, expensive mess of his life, and I was expected to quietly, submissively, and gratefully clean it up. Mark was the undisputed, worshipped golden child of the family. He was loud, charismatic, traditionally handsome in a boyish way, athletic, and possessed a terrifyingly reckless impulsivity that my parents constantly, bizarrely framed as free-spiritedness or untapped creative genius. The double standard was established before I could even conceptualize it. When Mark turned 16, my parents took out a second mortgage to buy him a brand new Jeep, which he subsequently wrapped around a telephone pole 6 months later because he was drag race racing. My parents hugged him, cried over his safety, and bought him another car. When I turned 16, I was handed a bus schedule and told that building character meant paying for my own transportation. If Mark failed a college class, the professor was clearly biased and the curriculum was flawed. If I got an A- instead of an A+, I was sat down and sternly lectured about not applying myself. I was the quiet, invisible, relentlessly responsible daughter. I was the one who secured a full, highly competitive academic scholarship to a top-tier university, because I knew my parents wouldn't save a single dime for my tuition. When I graduated summa cum laude, my parents left the commencement ceremony early because Mark was feeling a little under the weather from a hangover. I spent my 20s ruthlessly, exhaustingly climbing the corporate ladder in commercial finance. I worked 80-hour weeks. I sacrificed holidays, vacations, and sleep to build an ironclad fortress of financial security around myself, because I had chosen a demanding, high-stress career and had made the very deliberate, peaceful, personal choice to remain completely child-free. My parents and my brother fundamentally viewed my hard-earned wealth not as a personal achievement to be proud of, but as a communal, limitless family emergency fund. Whenever Mark maxed out his credit cards on impulsive, soul-searching trips to backpacking through Europe or attending week-long music festivals he couldn't afford, my parents would invite me over for dinner, sit me down, sigh heavily, and ask me to help your brother out just this once. When he decided he wanted to be a visionary entrepreneur and started an artisanal kombucha brewery that failed in 3 months, I was the one guilt-tripped into paying his commercial lease penalty so he wouldn't be sued. For an entire decade, blinded by a toxic, deeply ingrained sense of familial guilt and a desperate, pathetic, childlike desire to finally earn my parents' love, respect, and approval, I complied. I wrote the checks. I paid the overdue utility bills. I quietly played the role of the infinite, silent ATM, constantly gaslighting myself into believing that this was simply what loyal, loving families did for one another. Then, Mark met Chloe. If Mark was a financial black hole, Chloe was a supernova of pure, unadulterated, toxic entitlement. She was essentially the female version of my brother, but weaponized with a beige, highly curated Instagram aesthetic and a terrifying lack of empathy. She was incredibly image-obsessed, entirely allergic to steady, traditional employment, and firmly, deeply believed that she was inherently destined for a life of boundless, unearned luxury simply because she existed. She called herself a lifestyle curator, which was code for unemployed and living off credit. When they first started dating, Mark brought her to my house for a barbecue. Chloe immediately sized me up. She didn't look at me and see a future sister-in-law or a friend. She looked at my house, my designer shoes, my tailored clothes, and my car, and her eyes practically turned into spinning cartoon dollar signs. Within 10 minutes of meeting me, she casually asked exactly how much my Cartier watch cost and what my annual bonus structure looked like. She saw me not as a human being, but as the ultimate gullible sponsor. When Mark proposed to her after only 8 months of dating, using a massive, gaudy, custom-designed diamond ring he later confessed to me he had financed at a predatory 24% interest rate, my parents were absolutely ecstatic. They wept tears of joy. I was genuinely happy for him too, foolishly assuming that marriage and the terrifying prospect of building a real life with someone might finally force him to grow up, settle down, and take real responsibility for his own existence. I was catastrophically, embarrassingly naive. The engagement didn't trigger a newfound sense of maturity or financial literacy in Mark. Instead, it had triggered the most spectacular, unhinged, sociopathic display of pure, unchecked entitlement I have ever witnessed in my entire life. Chloe didn't just want a wedding. She wanted a massive, cinematic royal coronation that would serve as the ultimate envy-inducing content farm for her social media followers. She demanded a historic, sweeping, waterfront estate venue that cost more to rent for 8 hours than most people make in a year. She wanted imported, out-of-season, cascading white orchids dripping from the ceilings, a custom, haute couture designer gown imported from Italy, a 5-course, Michelin-quality plated dinner for 250 guests, a live 12-piece brass band, a professional drone videography team, and a content creation squad to post live updates to her Instagram. The estimated baseline cost for her ridiculous, out-of-touch Pinterest board fantasy was sitting right at $50,000, and that was before taxes and gratuity. Mark, who currently worked part-time as a personal trainer at a local gym and had exactly $0 in his checking account, obviously couldn't afford a fraction of it. My parents, who had severely, permanently drained their own retirement accounts years ago to fund Mark's previous bad decisions and failed business ventures, couldn't afford it either. They were living entirely on Social Security and a meager pension. The trap was meticulously set on a completely random, seemingly innocent Sunday evening in early spring. My parents invited me over to my childhood home for a special, intimate family dinner to officially celebrate the engagement and, as my mother sweetly put it, discuss the exciting upcoming wedding logistics. I arrived carrying a $200 bottle of vintage wine, fully expecting to be asked to perhaps contribute $3,000 or $4,000 toward the catering, or to generously offer to pay for Chloe's wedding dress as my official gift to the couple. I walked in, hugged them all, and sat down at the dining room table, surrounded by my smiling parents, my grinning brother, and his glowing, overly manicured fiancé. The dinner was perfectly, suspiciously pleasant. My mother cooked my favorite meal, roast chicken and potatoes, and my father poured the wine with a jovial laugh. It was a masterclass in psychological softening. But the absolute second the dinner plates were cleared to the kitchen and the dessert was served, the entire atmosphere of the room violently shifted. Mark dramatically, almost theatrically, reached down into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, professionally printed, glossy, spiral-bound presentation folder. He slid it slowly across the polished mahogany wood until it rested directly in front of my plate. I looked down at the cover. It was printed on heavy, expensive cardstock. It read, "Mark and Chloe's dream wedding, budget and vision board." "What's this?" I asked, genuinely confused, resting my hand lightly on the thick packet. "We wanted to share our exact, complete, uncompromised vision with you," Mark said, leaning back in his chair with a smug, deeply arrogant, intensely confident smile, placing his fingers together behind his head. "Chloe and I have been working so incredibly hard on this. We've toured places, we've crunched all the numbers, and we've found the absolute perfect venue, the perfect high-end caterer, and an award-winning photographer. We've negotiated the absolute best rates we possibly could. The grand total comes out to just over $50,000. He paused, taking a slow, deliberate sip of his wine, locking his eyes with mine. "And since Mom and Dad are on a fixed income now, and we obviously don't want to burden them in their golden years, we figured the easiest, most logical, streamlined thing to do would be for you to just write a single, lump sum check to our joint account this week. That way, we can just handle all the individual vendor payments from there without stressing you out with the minor details." The room went completely, terrifyingly, oppressively silent. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I stared at him, my brain completely stalling. I waited for the punchline. I waited for him to laugh loudly, to slap the table, to tell me it was a ridiculous, elaborate joke, to say he was just messing with his uptight corporate sister. But he didn't laugh. Chloe was staring at me with a bright, expectant, aggressively entitled smile. her hands clasped together under her chin like a child waiting for a pony. My parents were nodding along in unison, looking at me with the exact same heavy, manipulative, guilt-inducing expectation they used whenever they wanted me to bail him out of a crisis. My brain completely short-circuited. I slowly flipped open the heavy folder, my eyes rapidly scanning the absurd, meticulously typed, itemized list. *500 for a custom, multi-tiered champagne sour featuring vintage Moet. *1000 for a custom, imported white rose floral wall for Instagram photos. $5,000 for a videography drone team. 500 for custom, monogrammed silk napkins that guests would wipe their mouths on and throw away. $4,000 for a live perfume blending bar for the cocktail hour. Mark, I said, my voice barely a raspy with genuinely, fundamentally struggling to comprehend the sheer, staggering, psychopathic audacity of the request. Are you completely out of your mind? You want me to pay $50,000 for your wedding? Your entire wedding? Well, yeah, Mark said casually, shrugging his broad shoulders, as if he were asking me to spot him $20 for a pizza. It just makes the most sense logically. Come on, Maya. You're the VP of your division now. We all know you make mid-six figures. You don't hide it well with that car you drive. Your mortgage is basically entirely paid off. You don't have any student loan debt. And let's be entirely, brutally honest here. He leaned forward, resting his elbows heavily on the table, the fake, jovial, brotherly smile melting away into something cold, resentful, and utterly dismissive. You have no kids to waste your money on. You're never going to have a real family to support. You've made that perfectly clear. So what are you even doing with all that cash? Just hoarding it in a bank account so you can look at a screen and feel important. This is for your family. This is my one, single special day. You should want to do this for us. It shouldn't even be a question. It's the least you can do. The words hit me with the devastating, explosive, pulverizing force of a runaway freight train. You have no kids to waste your money on. In that single, devastating, brutally honest, incredibly cruel sentence, my brother completely, perfectly laid bare exactly how my entire family viewed my very existence. My deliberate, peaceful choice to be child-free, my decades of grueling, exhausting hard work, my late nights sacrificing my physical health at the office, my careful, highly disciplined financial planning. Absolutely none of it was respected. None of it was seen as my earned success. In their eyes, my life was entirely devoid of inherent value or purpose, and my wealth was simply unassigned, unclaimed communal capital, waiting to be rightfully seized by the real family members who were hitting traditional, socially acceptable milestones. They viewed my womb as barren, and thus, my life as nothing more than a utility. I wasn't a sister, I wasn't a daughter. I was a blank, faceless, walking ATM machine whose absolute only discernible value to these people was my ability to fund their delusions of grandeur. I looked desperately at my mother, fully expecting her to finally, for once in her life, intervene. I expected her to reprimand Mark for his unbelievable cruelty, his astronomical greed, and his breathtaking disrespect. I waited for her to be a mother and defend her daughter. Instead, my mother reached across the table and gently, softly patted the back of my hand. He makes a very good, practical point, sweetheart, my mother cooed, her voice dripping with that familiar, toxic, suffocating, weaponized sweetness. You are so incredibly, uniquely blessed financially, far more than you need for just one person living alone. Mark and Chloe are just starting out in life. They deserve to have a beautiful, memorable celebration to launch their new life together. Family is absolutely everything, Maya. When you leave this earth, you can't take your bank accounts with you into the grave. You should want to share your blessings with the people who love you. It's the right thing to do. A hot, blinding, white-hot wave of pure, unadulterated homicidal fury washed over my entire body. I could taste metallic copper in the back of my mouth. I could feel my pulse pounding violently, rhythmically in my temples. The sheer injustice of it made my vision blur for a fraction of a second. But as quickly as the searing, blinding anger surged, it vanished. It evaporated entirely, replaced instantly by an absolute, frigid, diamond-hard, terrifyingly sharp, Arctic clarity. The suffocating, decades-long, heavy fog of familial obligation completely lifted from my brain. the heavy, invisible steel chain that had kept me hopelessly tied to their endless demands, their emotional blackmail, and their constant manipulation shattered into a million microscopic pieces. I saw them, truly, deeply, finally saw them, for the parasitic, entitled, unapologetic users they were. I looked down at the ridiculous, glossy, spiral-bound budget folder sitting on the table. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I didn't throw my wine glass. I calmly closed the heavy cover, slid it smoothly and deliberately back across the polished wooden table, and watched it bump against Mark's half-empty wine glass, almost tipping it over. No, I said. It was just one single, quiet, simple syllable, but it dropped into the center of the dining room like a live, ticking hand grenade. Mark's smug, intensely entitled, victorious smile instantly vanished, replaced by a look of profound, genuine, uncomprehending shock. No? What do you mean? No! Maya, we just laid out exactly why it makes perfect sense. I'm not asking for a loan that you have to stress about me paying back. I'm telling you what we need to make this happen. I'm your brother. And I am telling you no, I replied. My voice was perfectly, flawlessly steady, completely devoid of any anger, sorrow, or hesitation. I operated with the cold, silent, lethal, terrifying efficiency of a highly trained surgeon removing a malignant tumor. I am not paying $50,000 for your wedding. I am not paying $5,000 for your wedding. I am not paying a single solitary dime for this ridiculous, extravagant, pathetic party. Chloe gasped loudly, her eyes going wide with panic and rage, slamming her manicured hand flat on the table. Excuse me, are you seriously going to be this incredibly, disgustingly selfish? We already booked the venue. We signed the contract. The non-refundable $10,000 deposit is due on Tuesday morning. We counted on you. We told them the check was coming from our wealthy sister. That sounds like a massive, terrifying, legally binding logistical and financial problem for you and your fiancé, Chloe, I said smoothly, pushing my chair back, standing up from the table, and calmly picking up my designer purse. You should probably call the venue first thing in the morning and cancel before they sue you for breach of contract and ruin your credit score. My father abruptly stood up, his heavy oak chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor, his face turning a mottled, furious, vein-popping shade of red. Maya Elizabeth, sit back down right this instant. You do not speak to your future sister-in-law that way under my roof. Your brother is getting married. This is the most important day of his entire life. You have more than enough money sitting around doing absolutely nothing. Stop being a greedy, spiteful, jealous, selfish brat and help your family. Help my family? I echoed. I turned slowly and looked my father dead in the eyes, holding his furious gaze with such intense, cold, absolute emptiness that he actually, physically flinched backward. Let's talk about exactly how I've helped this family, I said, my voice rising just enough to command every single atom in the room. I paid off Mark's $30,000 credit card debt 3 years ago so he wouldn't have to declare bankruptcy and ruin your address history. I bought the car he is currently driving sitting in your driveway because he wrapped his last one around a telephone pole while driving drunk. And I paid the lawyer to keep it off his record. I pay the $600 monthly premium for your and Mom's supplemental health insurance, Dad, because your pension doesn't cover it and you refuse to save. I paid $15,000 in cash for the new roof on this very house last summer because you didn't have the savings for it, and it was leaking into the living room, ruining the drywall. I paused, letting the staggering financial inventory hang heavily in the air, laying bare exactly who held the absolute power in the room. I turned my attention back to Mark, who was now looking incredibly pale, sweaty, and deeply panicked. His bravado had completely evaporated. I have been financially bleeding myself dry for this family for an entire decade, while you all treat me like a highly inconvenient, annoying bank teller, I continued, staring daggers into my brother. And you just sat there, drank the wine I bought, and told me my life is meaningless and my money is wasted because I don't have children. I took a step back toward the hallway. You're right about one thing, Mark, I said, my voice carrying a quiet, terrifying, absolute authority. I don't have kids, which means I have absolutely zero dependents, which means my money is entirely, unequivocally mine. And more importantly, it means I don't have to tolerate a single microscopic ounce of disrespect from anyone in this room to keep the peace. You want a $50,000 wedding with a drone team, a champagne tower, and a perfume bar. Go get a second job. Go get a third job. Sell a kidney. Because the Bank of Maya is permanently, irrevocably, forever closed. I didn't wait for their response. I didn't stay to listen to my mother start crying or my father start screaming. I turned on my heel, walked out of the dining room, walked out the heavy front door, and got into my car. The absolute second my engine started and I pulled out of the driveway, my phone immediately started exploding. It was a relentless, buzzing, vibrating barrage of furious, unhinged, vitriolic text messages and voicemails from Mark, Chloe, and my parents. Mark, you're a sociopath. You're trying to ruin my life because you're a bitter, barren spinster and no man wants you. Chloe, you owe us this. We already sent out the save the dates. You are destroying my dream, you selfish bitch. Dad, turn your car around right now. If you do not fund this wedding, you are no longer a part of this family. You are dead to us. I read the texts at a stoplight. I didn't cry. I didn't feel a single fleeting ounce of guilt or sorrow. I felt a profound, overwhelming, beautiful, dizzying sense of absolute, unparalleled freedom. When I reached my quiet, beautifully decorated, pristine, peaceful house, I walked inside, locked the heavy deadbolt, sat on my plush velvet sofa, poured myself a massive glass of incredibly expensive Cabernet, and pulled out my laptop. I logged into my online banking portals. I operated with ruthless, military-grade, scorched earth efficiency. I wasn't just saying no to the wedding. I was burning the entire parasitic bridge to the ground and salting the earth behind me. I permanently canceled the automatic monthly drafts I had set up for my parents' then supplemental health insurance premiums. I canceled the autopay on Mark's car insurance policy. I logged into the property management portal and completely, legally removed myself as the financial guarantor on Mark's luxury apartment lease, notifying the landlord that I would no longer be responsible for his defaults. I canceled the secondary, high-limit emergency credit card that my mother carried in her purse, which she secretly used for shopping sprees. I changed all my passwords and locked my credit with the 3 major bureaus, just in case they were desperate enough to try and take out loans in my name. I cut every single solitary financial tie that bound me to their parasitic existence. If I was going to be labeled a selfish, greedy, barren monster by the people who had leeched off my hard work for 10 years, I decided I was going to fully, flawlessly, unapologetically embrace the role. The fallout over the next 6 months was an absolute, unmitigated, spectacular, apocalyptic disaster for them, and I watched it all unfold from a safe, heavily insulated, thoroughly peaceful distance through the grapevine. Mark actually had the audacity to show up at my house 3 days later, banging on my front door and demanding I transfer the funds because the venue was threatening to sue them. I didn't open the door. I spoke to him through the Ring camera, telling him that if he didn't step off my porch in 30 seconds, I was calling the police and pressing trespassing charges. He looked at the camera, saw the absolute dead seriousness in my eyes, cursed at me, and left. He never came back, without my endless, invisible stream of subsidies propping them up. My parents' stark financial reality hit them like a speeding freight train. They couldn't afford to bail Mark out. They couldn't even afford their own basic luxuries anymore. Mark and Chloe, completely unable to produce the $10,000 non-refundable venue deposit by the Tuesday deadline, lost their booking entirely. The venue legally sued them for breach of contract on the catering minimums they had arrogantly signed for. Chloe, realizing with horrifying, sobering clarity that Mark wasn't the endless, wealthy fountain of cash she assumed he was through me, completely lost her mind. The sheer, crushing stress of having to actually pay for their own lives, face a lawsuit, and manage their own debts fractured their shallow relationship to its absolute core. They fought constantly, engaging in screaming matches so loud that Mark's neighbors repeatedly called the police. The massive, cinematic, royal coronation wedding was abruptly, humiliatingly cancelled. To save face on social media and desperately, pathetically pretend everything was fine to her followers, they ended up getting legally married at a cheap, dilapidated local public park pavilion on a rainy, gloomy Saturday afternoon. I saw the photos online. They served cold supermarket dealy sandwiches and warm soda to 50 deeply uncomfortable people. Chloe looked absolutely miserable and furious in a heavily discounted, ill-fitting, off-the-rack dress she bought online. Mark looked defeated. I wasn't invited, and frankly, I wouldn't have gone if I had been. As for me, I took the exact $50,000 Mark had so arrogantly, violently demanded from my savings account, and I did exactly what he accused me of doing. I wasted it entirely on myself. I booked a 3-week ultra-luxury first-class vacation to the Maldives. I flew in a lie-flat pod, sipping vintage Dom Perignon and eating caviar. I stayed in a massive, private overwater bungalow, with a glass floor looking down into the vibrant coral reef. I drank expensive cocktails while soaking in a private infinity pool, watching the brilliant, fiery orange sunset over the crystal-clear Indian Ocean. I read thick novels, I swam with massive sea turtles, I got 2-hour daily deep tissue massages, and I slept for 12 hours a day, entirely undisturbed by a single phone call or text message. Lying on that pristine white sand beach, listening to the gentle crash of the waves, I realized a fundamental truth. My hard-earned money wasn't a communal family resource to be plundered by lazy, entitled people. It was the physical, mathematical manifestation of my precious time, my exhausting energy, my intellect, and my life force. And I had the absolute, undeniable, unapologetic right to spend every single penny of it entirely on my own peace, comfort, and happiness. It has been 2 glorious, quiet, incredibly prosperous years since that spectacular dinner explosion. I haven't spoken a single word to my brother or my parents since the day I walked out of that dining room. I changed my phone number and blocked their emails. I heard through a distant gossipy cousin that Mark and Chloe are deeply, cripplingly in debt, constantly on the verge of divorce, and living in a cramped, miserable, 1-bedroom apartment on the bad side of town, entirely cut off from the lavish lifestyle they felt so inherently entitled to. My parents complain bitterly to anyone who will listen at their church about their ungrateful, wealthy, selfish daughter, who cruelly abandoned them in their old age. But sitting here today in my quiet, pristine, beautiful home, looking at my thriving, massive investment portfolios, and leisurely planning my next month-long trip to Japan, I don't feel a single, microscopic shred of regret. Mark genuinely thought he was insulting me to my very core when he sneered that I had no kids to waste my money on. He thought he was expertly exploiting my greatest vulnerability as a woman. He didn't realize in his profound, staggering arrogance that he was actually pointing out my absolute greatest strength. I have no dependents. I have no toxic obligations. I cannot be leveraged and I cannot be guilted. I am completely, beautifully, unapologetically, and fiercely free. He aggressively demanded a $50,000 wedding to feed his fiancé's massive ego. But in doing so, he inadvertently handed me the keys to the rest of my unburdened, limitless life. And for that profound, unintentional, magnificent gift, I will always be incredibly, eternally grateful.